In the shadowy annals of 20th century European history, few figures embody the corrupting nature of absolute power, quite like Elena Ceaușescu, the wife of Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceaușescu. Her story is one of extraordinary deception, fraudulent scientific acclaim, and ultimately a violent end that shocked the world. But the tale of Elena Ceaușescu did not end with her execution on Christmas Day 1989. In a macabre twist of fate that would occur decades later, her very grave would be opened, her coffin disturbed, and her remains examined in ways that revealed shocking truths about both her life and death. From peasant girl to power broker Elena Ceaușescu was born Lenuța Petrescu on January 7, 1916, in the impoverished village of Petrești, Dâmbovița County, in the historical region of Wallachia. Her origins were humble in the extreme. She came from a peasant family, where her father worked as a ploughman, struggling to make ends meet in rural Romania. The grinding poverty of her childhood would later be obscured by communist propaganda. But the reality was that Elena received only an elementary school education, barely achieving literacy, before circumstances forced her to leave her rural home. Like thousands of young Romanians in the 1930s, Elena moved to Bucharest seeking work and escape from the crushing burden of rural poverty. The capital city offered opportunities that her village could never provide, and she found employment first as a laboratory assistant, then as an unskilled worker at the Jacquard textile factory. It was in these industrial surroundings, among the politically active workers of Bucharest, that Elena's life would take its fateful turn. The year 1939 marked a pivotal moment in Elena's trajectory. Not only did she join the Bucharest branch of the Romanian Communist Party, but she also met a slender, handsome young man named Nicolae Ceaușescu, who was 2 years her junior. Nicolae came from a similarly impoverished rural background, and like Elena, he had been drawn into the communist movement as a means of challenging the established order. Their shared political convictions and humble origins created an immediate bond, and Nicolae was reportedly so instantly and strongly attracted to Elena that he never looked at another woman romantically. Their early relationship was marked by the dangerous realities of underground political activity. Nicolae's frequent imprisonments for his communist activities meant their courtship was interrupted by long separations, but their commitment to each other and to their political cause remained unwavering. The couple finally married on December 23, 1945, as Romania was emerging from the devastation of World War II and transitioning toward communist rule. This union would prove to be one of the most consequential marriages in Romanian history, binding together two individuals whose hunger for power would ultimately consume their nation. The rise of a false academic as Nicolae Ceaușescu climbed the ranks of the Romanian Communist Party, Elena began constructing what would become one of the most audacious academic frauds in modern history. Despite having only an elementary education and lacking any genuine scientific training, Elena embarked on a campaign to reinvent herself as a distinguished chemist and researcher. This transformation was not merely about personal vanity. It was a calculated strategy to legitimize her growing political influence and create an independent power base within the regime. The foundation of Elena's fraudulent scientific career was built on a combination of stolen research, forced collaboration, and institutional intimidation. As her husband's power grew, Elena used the apparatus of the Romanian state to coerce genuine scientists into ghostwriting her supposed research. The Romanian intelligence service, the DIE, was employed to gather information on research publications and pending patents from Western scientists, which Elena would then claim as her own work. These stolen discoveries would be patented and published first in Romania, then internationally, with Elena's name prominently featured as the primary researcher. The scope of Elena's academic deception was breathtaking in its audacity. She demanded that her name appear as co-author on all chemistry research published in Romania, despite being unable to pronounce, let alone understand, most chemistry terms in the publications. Romanian academics, fearful for their lives and careers, were forced to remain silent about these severe ethical violations. The academic community lived in terror of contradicting Elena's scientific pretensions knowing that such defiance could result in imprisonment, exile, or worse. Elena's fraudulent credentials accumulated rapidly as her husband's regime consolidated power. She was awarded a doctorate in chemistry, despite never having conducted legitimate research or demonstrated scientific competency. The University of Bucharest and other Romanian institutions were compelled to grant her advanced degrees and academic positions, transforming her from an elementary school dropout into what state propaganda presented as a world-renowned scientist international. Recognition and Western complicity, perhaps, the most damning aspect of Elena Ceaușescu's fraudulent career was the willingness of prestigious Western institutions to participate in her deception. The pursuit of diplomatic relations and commercial opportunities with communist Romania led several respected academic bodies to compromise their standards and grant Elena honorary titles and recognition that she had not earned. In 1978, the Royal Institute of Chemistry in Britain elected Elena as a fellow, a distinction that carried significant prestige in the international scientific community. The ceremony was conducted with full pomp and circumstance, with Nicolae Ceaușescu's portrait prominently displayed on the wall and luminaries such as Dorothy Hodgkin and Sir Frank Hartley in attendance. Professor Sir Richard Norman, as president of the Institute, praised Elena's supposed contributions as a distinguished scientist to macromolecular experimental chemistry, specifically highlighting her alleged work on the stereospecific polymerization of isoprene, on the stabilization of synthetic rubbers, and on copolymerization. The Polytechnic of Central London, now the University of Westminster, went even further, making Elena an honorary professor, the first such distinction the institution had ever granted to a foreign scientist. The ceremony included the playing of the Romanian national anthem, and Professor Terence Berlin, senior pro-rector, hailed her as one of the most distinguished graduates of the Bucharest Polytechnic and praised her for conducting research of great distinction in the difficult field of polymer chemistry. These honors were not merely ceremonial, they provided Elena with international credibility that she used to further her fraudulent career. Western recognition served as validation for her domestic propaganda, allowing the Romanian regime to claim that Elena's scientific achievements were acknowledged by the world's leading academic institutions. The complicity of these prestigious bodies in Elena's deception demonstrates how political considerations can corrupt even the most respected academic institutions. The destruction of Romanian science. Elena Ceaușescu's influence over Romanian science extended far beyond her personal fraud. She systematically destroyed the country's research infrastructure and academic freedom. As president of the National Council for Science and Technology from 1979, she wielded unprecedented control over Romania's scientific and technological efforts. Her diabolical orders banned entire scientific disciplines, destroyed research institutions, and suppressed free thought under what one former education minister described as systematic obscurantism. The Romanian Academy, once a proud institution of learning and research, became a particular target of Elena's destructive influence. When the Academy attempted to resist her ambitions in the mid-1970s, it was stripped of all real powers and reduced to a primarily ceremonial body. Elena's regime introduced a system for re-accrediting academic degrees every few years, ostensibly to ensure that scholars kept up with current developments, but in reality serving as a weapon to ensure political conformity. The impact on Romanian science was catastrophic. Fundamental research, particularly in physics and mathematics, was virtually destroyed in favor of projects that served the short-term aims of state planning. Genuine researchers were forced to abandon their work or flee the country, while those who remained lived in constant fear of political persecution. The brain drain from Romania during this period represented an incalculable loss of intellectual capital that would take generations to recover. Elena's policies also extended beyond academia into social engineering, projects that caused immense human suffering. Many believe that Romania's harsh pro-birth laws and the brutal systematization program that involved bulldozing villages were Elena's own ideas. Her ambitious development of Romania's petrochemical industry rapidly depleted the country's oil reserves, turned it into a net energy importer, and by the mid-1980s led to draconian energy rationing and a massive death toll from hypothermia every winter. The revolution and swift justice by the late 1980s, Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu's regime had become increasingly isolated and despotic. The couple's megalomaniacal tendencies and disastrous economic policies had pushed Romania to the brink of collapse. Popular dissent, long suppressed through brutal state security measures, finally erupted in December 1989 as part of the broader wave of anti-communist revolutions sweeping Eastern Europe. The Romanian Revolution began in Timișoara and quickly spread to Bucharest, where massive crowds demanded the overthrow of the Ceaușescu regime. On December 22, 1989, Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu attempted to flee the capital as their support collapsed and the military turned against them. Their helicopter escape was short-lived. They were captured the same day and held at various locations, before being brought to a military base in Târgoviște for what would become one of the most dramatic trials in modern European history, the trial of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu. December 25, 1989, was conducted by an extraordinary military tribunal, essentially a drumhead court-martial created by the newly formed National Salvation Front. The proceedings were predetermined, lasting less than an hour, with the outcome never in doubt. The main charge was genocide, with Romanian state television announcing that Nicolae Ceaușescu had been responsible for the deaths of 60,000 people. Nicolae Ceaușescu refused to recognize the tribunal throughout the proceedings, arguing its lack of constitutional basis and claiming that the revolutionary authorities were part of a Soviet plot. His defiance did not prevent the inevitable verdict. Both he and Elena were found guilty of all charges and condemned to death. The sentence was to be carried out immediately, with no possibility of appeal or clemency. The execution of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu took place at 2:50 p.m. local time on December 25, 1989. At Military Unit UM-0417 in Târgoviște, General Victor Stanculescu had brought a specially selected team of paratroopers, hand-picked earlier that morning to serve as the firing squad. 8 soldiers from a paratroop regiment were transported by helicopter from the Boteni base. Captain Ionel Boeru, Sergeant Major Joachim Octavian, and Dorin Marian Sirlin, and 5 other non-commissioned officers selected from 20 volunteers. The final moments of the Ceaușescus revealed the true character of both individuals. Nicolae declared, "We could have been shot without having this masquerade," while Elena screamed, "You sons of bitches," as she was led outside and lined up against the wall. Nicolae began singing a fragment of the Internationale, the communist anthem, before the soldiers opened fire. The execution happened with shocking speed. The firing squad began shooting as soon as the couple was positioned against the wall, before any formal command to fire had been given. The television crew assigned to document the trial and execution was unable to videotape the killings in full due to the rapidity of the shooting. Only the final round of shots was captured on film. According to retired Captain Boru, who spoke to The Guardian in 2014, he believes his shots were solely responsible for both deaths because he was the only member of the firing squad who remembered to switch his assault rifle to fully automatic mode. The aftermath revealed the thoroughness of the execution. In 1990, a member of the National Salvation Front reported that 120 bullets were found in the couple's bodies. Prime Minister Petre Roman later explained that the execution was carried out quickly due to rumors that loyalists would attempt to rescue the couple. The speed and finality of the executions reflected both the revolutionary authorities' determination to prevent any possibility of a counter-revolution and the deep hatred that had accumulated against the Ceaușescu regime. The burial in years of mystery following their execution, the bodies of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu were transported to Bucharest and buried hastily at Ghencea Cemetery. The burial was conducted with minimal ceremony, reflecting the revolutionary authorities' desire to dispose of the dictatorial couple quickly and without fanfare. Initially, Nicolae and Elena were buried in separate plots on different sides of a path that ran through the cemetery. Nicolae's grave was marked with a simple white stone cross with a small red cross in the center, while Elena's resting place was even more austere, located behind a modern marble mausoleum and marked only with a black iron cross inscribed with her name and dates of birth and death. The contrast between their humble graves and the grandiose mausoleums of other communist leaders was stark and intentional. Despite the official story, rumors and conspiracy theories began to circulate almost immediately after the burial. Some family members and supporters claimed that the bodies buried at Ghencea Cemetery were not actually those of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu. These theories suggested that the real bodies had been buried elsewhere, or even that the couple had somehow escaped execution and fled Romania. The graves became sites of pilgrimage for some Romanians who remained loyal to the former dictator. Communist symbols and flowers regularly decorated both burial sites, maintained by visitors who viewed the Ceaușescus as martyrs rather than tyrants. The cemetery authorities found themselves in the unusual position of managing what had become unofficial monuments to one of Europe's most notorious dictatorial couples. The daughter's request and exhumation. The mystery surrounding the Ceaușescus' remains persisted for over 2 decades until their daughter decided to take action. Zoia Ceaușescu, along with other family members, formally requested that the authorities exhume the bodies to confirm their identities through DNA testing. The family also wanted Nicolae and Elena to be reburied together in a single grave, ending their separation in death. On July 20, 2010, Romanian authorities agreed to the family's request and began the process of exhumation. Cemetery workers carefully hoisted the wooden caskets of both Nicolae and Elena out of their respective graves under the supervision of pathologists and cemetery officials. The procedure was conducted with appropriate scientific protocols to ensure that any DNA samples collected would be viable for testing. The exhumation process revealed the first shocking discovery about Elena Ceaușescu's remains. While Nicolae's body was found to be in relatively good condition after more than 2 decades in the ground, Elena's corpse had decomposed to such an extent that proper DNA extraction proved extremely difficult. The pathologists were able to identify Nicolae's remains with certainty. He was even found wearing the grey fur hat in which he had been executed. The dramatic difference in the condition of the 2 bodies raised immediate questions. There was no obvious explanation for why Elena's remains had deteriorated so much more rapidly than her husband's, especially considering they had been buried in the same cemetery under similar conditions. Some speculated that her coffin may have provided insufficient protection from the elements, or that the burial had been conducted with less care. DNA testing and scientific confirmation. The DNA testing process that followed the exhumation provided definitive answers about Nicolae's identity, while leaving Elena's case tantalizingly unresolved. Dr. Dan Dermengiu, head of Romania's Legal Medicine Institute, announced that genetic material extracted from Nicolae's remains had been successfully matched with DNA samples from his brother and son. The DNA from his brother and his son show that it is Nicolae Ceaușescu. Dermengiu confirmed to the Mediafax news agency. The scientific confirmation of Nicolae's identity put to rest decades of conspiracy theories and speculation. The body exhumed from Ghencea Cemetery was definitively that of Romania's former dictator, validating the official account of his burial. The preservation of his remains after 21 years underground also provided forensic experts with clear evidence of his violent death. The multiple bullet wounds from his execution were still visible. Elena's case proved far more problematic for the forensic team. The advanced state of decomposition had made it impossible to extract sufficient DNA material for conclusive testing. While the pathologists could not scientifically confirm that the remains were those of Elena Ceaușescu, the circumstances of the burial and the confirmation of Nicolae's identity led authorities to accept that the deteriorated remains were indeed those of the former first lady. The failure to definitively identify Elena's remains through DNA testing added another layer of mystery to her already controversial legacy. Some observers noted the irony that a woman who had built her career on fraudulent scientific credentials would ultimately elude scientific confirmation of her own identity in death. The condition of her remains seemed to mirror the dissolution of her fabricated academic achievements. Both had crumbled beyond recognition when subjected to rigorous scientific examination, reburial, and final rest, despite the inability to conclusively identify Elena's remains through DNA testing. Romanian authorities decided to proceed with the family's request for joint burial. On December 9, 2010, nearly 5 months after the exhumation, Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu were reburied together at Bucharest's Ghencea Cemetery. The reburial ceremony was conducted in the evening with minimal publicity, attended only by family members and cemetery officials. The new joint grave represented a significant change from the original burial arrangements. Instead of separate plots on opposite sides of the cemetery path, the couple now shared a single burial site with a unified headstone. The grave is located on the left side of the central path leading to the cemetery's small chapel, in plot I-35, making it more visible and accessible to visitors. The joint gravesite features a pink marble cross and headstone that stands out among the surrounding burial plots. The inscription includes both of their names and dates, finally uniting in death the couple who had shared power in life. Their son Nicu, who died in 1996, is also buried in the same cemetery, creating a family grouping that would have been unimaginable during the height of their power. The reburial marked the end of a decades-long saga that had begun with their dramatic execution on Christmas Day 1989. From their initial hasty burial in separate graves to the conspiracy theories about their identities, to the eventual exhumation and scientific testing, the Ceaușescu's remains had continued to generate controversy and mystery long after their deaths. The legacy of a false life, the opening of Elena Ceaușescu's coffin, and the examination of her remains serves as a powerful metaphor for the broader legacy of her fraudulent life. Just as her body had decomposed beyond scientific recognition, her fabricated academic achievements have increasingly been exposed and discredited by genuine researchers. More than 3 decades after her execution, Romanian academics and international scholars continue to work to remove her name from fraudulent publications and revoke the honorary degrees that she obtained through political pressure, rather than merit. The campaign to correct the scientific record regarding Elena Ceaușescu's supposed contributions has gained momentum in recent years. Dr. Andrei Dumbrava from Alexandru, Ioan Cuza University in Iași and Crisis Loi, a neuroscience and psychology researcher based in London, are leading efforts to have Elena's name removed from almost 24 scientific papers and books fraudulently published as her work. They are also calling for institutions including the UK's Royal Society of Chemistry and the University of Westminster, formerly the Polytechnic of Central London, to strip her of recognition and acknowledge that her scientific career was a sham. The persistence of Elena's fraudulent legacy in academic databases and citation indices represents a continuing injustice to legitimate researchers. Some of her stolen work is still being cited and accessed by current scholars who may be unaware of the true origins of the research. The fact that she couldn't recognize basic formulas taught to first-year chemistry students makes the continued presence of her name in scientific literature particularly galling to genuine researchers. The Romanian Academy, which had been reduced to a ceremonial body under Elena's influence, gained its own revenge in the aftermath of the revolution. 2 days after the execution of the Ceaușescus, a special meeting of Academy members voted to strip both Nicolae and Elena of all academic honors they had been awarded. However, Elena's PhD was never formally retracted in Romania, even though it was widely known she had not written it. Conclusion: the decomposition of power, the story of Elena Ceaușescu's opened coffin, represents more than just the physical deterioration of human remains. It symbolizes the ultimate exposure of a life built entirely on deception and fraud. While her husband's body remained sufficiently preserved to confirm his identity through DNA testing, Elena's advanced decomposition prevented scientific verification of who she truly was, even in death. This failure of identification mirrors her entire existence, a woman who constructed a false identity so thoroughly that her true self became irretrievable. The irony is profound and fitting. Elena Ceaușescu, who had demanded scientific recognition she never earned, who had stolen research from genuine scholars, and who had destroyed Romania's academic institutions, was ultimately undone by the very science she had corrupted. The DNA testing that could definitively identify her husband's remains failed to penetrate the mystery of her own decomposed corpse. In death as in life, Elena Ceaușescu remained an enigma built on falsehood. The ongoing efforts to remove Elena's name from scientific publications and revoke her fraudulent honors represent a necessary correction of the historical record. Her story serves as a cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of absolute power and the importance of maintaining academic integrity in the face of political pressure. The institutions that honored her during her lifetime must now confront their own complicity in legitimizing her fraudulent career. Elena Ceaușescu's legacy is one of destruction, the destruction of Romanian science, the destruction of academic freedom, and ultimately, the self-destruction that comes from building a life on lies. The opening of her coffin revealed not just the physical decomposition of her remains, but the complete dissolution of the fabricated identity she had spent decades constructing. In the end, the woman who had claimed to be Romania's greatest scientist could not even be definitively identified by science itself. A final, fitting verdict on a life of deception that brought ruin to her nation and ultimately to herself. Today, visitors to Ghencea Cemetery can find the joint grave of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu, marked by a pink marble cross that stands as a modest monument to one of Europe's most notorious dictatorial couples. But for Elena, the woman whose entire public identity was built on fraud, even her final resting place cannot fully confirm who she truly was. The mystery of her decomposed remains serves as an eternal reminder that a life built on lies ultimately crumbles to dust, leaving behind only questions and the bitter legacy of destruction wrought by absolute power, corrupted by absolute deception.